Welcome to the Thought Echoes podcast, where we have an opportunity to listen in as people reflect on their relationship with their thoughts and their creative work and how it's changed since their brain injury. My name is Beth Bonness, host of the Thought Echoes podcast. Thanks for joining. I hope you enjoyed this month's interview.
Hello, my name is Mimi Hayes. I'm a comedian, author, and brain injury survivor. I am, almost 9 years out from my first stroke. And when I say first stroke, I mean I had a second one recently, but I am doing the best I can. It's certainly not as bad as the first one, but I guess lightning does strike twice in the same place. So I'm excited to be here, excited to talk about it and answer all your questions, Beth.
Thank you for joining me, Mimi. I did not know about the second one. So you had a brain bleed / leak with your first one. And what was the second one?
Same thing, same place. Hasn't gotten nearly the size it did the first time around, but it's a cavernous angioma, clump of cells that can grow anywhere in your body. And oddly enough, I was in Scotland this second time. It was around November. I had a really bad migraine, and I thought, when I get back home, I should probably go see about that. And I was living in LA at the time, and so I got back to LA and I made an appointment with my doctor. She said, "Yeah, we could do a CT scan, just for kicks, because I said, yeah, I'd like to do that, knowing my history." And walked in, was expecting to walk back out. They rolled up with a wheelchair, said, "Come with us." I'm like, "Is that for me? What are you doing with that wheelchair?" This is bad. So they found the second bleed there. It is on the left side of my cerebellum. And currently it's stable. So I'm on the 6-month MRI plan. So I will be back in the States around January, February for a checkup scan. But we're stable. We're sitting with that leak, sitting on it.
So are you on like blood thinners or what medication? Just blood pressure medicine?
No, nothing like that. I mean, This is one of those fun, like, wait and see things that, although the first time around, I should say, it was on steroids. I was on some steroids because it was causing so much swelling in my brain. So it wasn't exactly like a stroke that causes the immediate damage. It was like this leaking process that was swelling my brain. So I was having all these stroke-like symptoms. I was having, I lost control of the left side of my body, lost a ton of weight. I was seeing double, eventually sideways, lost my taste, clumsy. You think I was drunk half the time. So it's just one of those really wild things you think is never going to happen to you until it does.
And then twice. And do they know the cause of it?
They have no idea. They've ruled out, like, I want to say heredity, but that's not the word I'm looking for. Genetics. They've ruled that out. Yeah. They've ruled that out. So I'm just really good at just growing little leaks in my head. I guess it's a skill of mine.
Oh God. Well, you're very optimistic, or at least making lots of lemonade out of the uncertainty of the event and recurrence. And it's just part of your, as you said, the 6-month MRI club. So in the spirit of Thought Echoes and talking to stroke brain injury survivors, I'm really fascinated about our individual relationship with our thoughts. And as I mentioned with mine, watching myself not talk as I'm having all these thoughts and telling a story was gift is kind of like a crazy way to put at it. But I mean, to watch myself experiencing at the time. And I don't know if my balance was off because I was sitting, but I had the, sparkles, and I had a claw when I tried to write and whatnot. But having to downshift into what's going on in my head because I couldn't communicate out, you're kind of on I was on slow motion for a while. So I've always been fascinated with that. And so as I've been talking to other people who have used a creative outlet, writing, acting, music, could be gardening or cooking. It doesn't have to be, you know, one of the traditional arts. But I'm curious about what your relationship was with your thoughts before the first one, I'll say, and then how that may have changed, or your awareness of them as you went through that, and now a second one, if there's been kind of any.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would say the first time it was just a whole lot of denial. You know, I was really young. I was 22. So my life at that point was just this tunnel vision of, for me at the time, I was becoming a high school teacher. And so I had this thing that I was supposed to be doing, and that's what I was going to do for my whole life, and nothing would ever go wrong. And so when this happened, I had a really hard time understanding it and even processing the reality of my situation. So I'd gotten a lot of trouble. I'm not a troublemaker, you know, deep down. I'm a rule follower, actually. But as this happened, after my brain surgery, I was in a rehab center for a few weeks, relearning how to walk and see, and, you know, do like third grade math problems and stuff that I'm like, what am I, you know, what is this? I didn't even understand why I was there, really. And then I would get in a lot of trouble because I would break the rules. You know, hospitals have rules, and for a reason, so that you don't hurt yourself, and that so the nurses don't get sued. So I would walk around, you know, my hospital room, and they'd be like, what are you trying to do? Like, did you know you can't walk? Like, are you sensing this is hard? And they even threatened to put in like a baby monitor in my room with a little camera because I just couldn't trust me. I was such a rule breaker. So, you know, I didn't have a lot of processing going on. I was lucid and conscious, and my personality was the same. None of that changed. You know, it's all, my location of my injury is in the cerebellum, which is a lot of motor functions and relearnable skills. And so I was always myself, you know, through the whole thing, but I just couldn't wrap my head around it. And then when I started to heal and get better, you know, throughout the course of that kind of first year, and I went right back into teaching. It was almost like I didn't even know or couldn't process what had happened. That happened, but it really didn't. So I'm just a normal person now.
Like I broke my leg and I went into rehab and now I'm back. Yeah.
And they cleared me to drive. So how hard could this be? And I went back into the classroom after about 3 months after brain surgery. It was wild. And you could tell that I was a hot mess. You know, I was a student teacher, so I had, you know, half the load of a normal teacher, but I was like, I was underwater, you know, the whole time. So I would say a lot of those thoughts were just denial, refusal to acknowledge that I had limitations and a disability, you know, because it was so invisible. You know this, like you and I, to other people, we would look like just any other person. And unfortunately, that's just not the reality of our situation. So it was a lot of lying to myself the first time around.
Did you journal or write about your experience or at all? I guess.
Yeah.
Full stop.
Yeah. I mean, I wasn't really a writer before this happened, but when I was diagnosed, my friend had said, I mean, you should write a book about this. And I was like, that's a total ridiculous thing to say, but I guess I'll do it because I'm sitting at home, you know, with this leaking head. Before I had the surgery, I was, you know, on bed rest for like 5 weeks, just deteriorating. So I thought, sure, why not? So I popped up my little laptop and started typing and noticed that, you know, my left hand wasn't getting the keys right, so I only could use my right hand. I'm like, this is going to take a really long time. But I really was like cataloging everything that was happening to me, because I knew I couldn't understand it. I was, you know, I knew that I needed to take it down so that maybe later I could work through it.
To write it down.
Yeah, to just write it down and, I said I was writing a book, big air quotes, like it's this big joke, but then I actually wrote the thing and then I actually published it. So
congratulations. That came out. When did that
thank
come out?
you.
2000.
That one came out in 2018.
2018.
Yeah.
That had to have felt good. And I mean, with your sense of humor, obviously your take on the experience would have brought, that personality into it. This wasn't a just kind of a medical
No, it's very far from.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'd even say, like, I am not a scientist. Like, I don't know what this is called,
Right.
Because it was through my eyes. It was just through my experience. And I'm grateful that I took it all down as it was happening. Even like, after surgery in the rehab center, I'd asked my parents to bring me my laptop so I could write. And then it was like, I'm going to keep just taking all this information in. And it was a hot mess. It was a jumble of thoughts and things that had happened and people I'd met and weird bits of dialogue, but eventually, I worked it out and put it out into the world. So I am very proud of that.
So, and congratulations again on that effort to just be able to focus with what you were going through, but to have, the awareness to take down stuff, knowing that you're not understanding, you don't get it all now, but if I want a breadcrumb to be able to come back, you didn't want to rely just on your memory, with all those kind of details. You have creatively pivoted to a bunch of different outlets. So you did this book, you had a podcast, you're doing this writing. So can you kind of talk about how that progression in your head went to migrate from, the surgery, then doing the book, and then your other creative outlets?
Yeah. So, it started with the writing and the book and realizing I had something to say. Because not that I was boring before this happened to me, but I didn't really think I had much. I was 22. I was just a 22-year-old gal living in Colorado, So I kind of had all these thoughts and ideas and got the, weird idea to go and do stand-up one day and talk about the brain surgery and, the nurses telling me your head's leaking and the sounds of an MRI machine and, it's just ridiculous things that I hadn't heard anyone say before. And so I put it on stage.
Why the comment? What had you done any play work before?
I'd done theater. Yeah, karaoke.
Karaoke.
I had done I was always a theater kid, and then I did improv in college, but I'd never done stand-up. So it was like this kind of, let's see if I can do it kind of challenge. It was really scary. Like, I didn't know anybody who was doing it. So it was kind of this weird hair of like creativity, really, like being like, what if I could do that? So I just went to an open mic and maybe got a laugh or two or a weird sound here and there. And I thought, okay, let's try it again next week. And started writing more, doing more, different content as I started teaching again. Some of it was about the students and releasing some of that angst about being a teacher for the first time, and looking like a kid myself and having no respect from my children and just fighting for my life in there with a brain injury. Like, just please just sit down long enough so I can take attendance. Like, I'm fighting for my life. Like, so the writing and the stand-up went hand in hand. Both of those things slowed down quite a bit while I was teaching because I had to survive. I had to being a teacher consumed so much of my life at that time. But I started doing I was getting better. I was, health-wise and confidence-wise. I was doing bigger shows. I was inviting people to my shows. I was like, okay, maybe I am a comedian, like capital C, like maybe that's what I am. To the point where I was like, you know what, I'm going to quit my job and I'm going to move to New York City and I'm going to do this and I'm going to get the book published and I'm going to do stand up and figure my life out and find odd jobs and, kind of ran away from my teaching self in a way, but was just so determined to just like, why don't I just do this? Like I've been through enough. Like, how hard could New York be? Oh, very hard, actually.
No. Oh, no. Where'd you live in New York?
I lived in Brooklyn. Yeah, up until the pandemic. And then that ended. So,
Yeah. Our eldest daughter lived
but
in Brooklyn for a while, so we'd go out and
yeah,
love visiting
it
Brooklyn. Love
yeah, it was a fun time of my life. It was crazy, you know. I had to wear these big headphones around because it's just such a loud city. As a brain injured person, you know, it's not an accessible place, so I'm lucky that I don't need to use any mobility devices because it's not a very accessible place, as you know. So
it.
but very fun, very exciting. Continue to do stand up, publish the book. um
When did the podcast
Started.
begin?
The podcast was around the same time as the book. I have a hard time just doing one thing at a time.
Clearly. Clearly.
I'm always like, oh, I have to have my hands in everything. So, you know, I was interviewing all these brain scientists as I was doing my book edits for the publisher on this very tight, you know, publishing schedule. Like, oh yeah, and nannying. I was a nanny for a few years there.
Nanny.
Hustling. I had tons of jobs. Was never sitting still. Which my parents have always known about me. They call me the girl with her hair on fire. Um, so I'm always, you know, I don't like to be extinguished. I need to be moving and grooving, and I've always been that way. So that hasn't stopped just because of the brain.
I know when I found out about your podcast and then I listened to the Goodbye to 2020, that one first, and then I went back and listened from the beginning. And the one with Michael Sheldon, Dr. Michael Sheldon.
Shadlin, yeah.
And it's great because this month's, or coincidental, this month's newsletter is about how does the brain react or change with improvisation. And that just kind of came out of the blue sometime. And it turned out that the another person I interviewed for the podcast, which is going to be with September, it could have been either one of you because you do the improv with comedy, but he's a jazz musician. And when I read about how the two parts of the brain, you know, kind of the traffic cop organizer and then the creative playmaker, that when they do the fMRI, they show that the creative part lights up and the other one goes out for coffee or something.
Mm-hmm.
And the Mike Keefe, who's the jazz music doctor, retired doctor, but jazz musician he always kind of loved. I was curious because his impulse center got hit. And so I was curious in talking with him whether or not that helped his jazz improvisation. But he's still trying to get the muscle memory back for playing. So he hasn't quite got back to the improvisation section. But then with comedy, with improv, now you weren't a comedian before. I mean, you didn't do improv before, right? So you can't.
I
We
did.
So how did, I know yours was back at the Cerebellum, but just the concept of when you improv, having the brain parts of it go to sleep and light up. How was your experience with that when you were doing improv, in the moment of doing improv?
Yeah, it's funny because when I first started doing stand-up, the first like couple years were very regimented. They were very structured in that like I memorized every word. I wrote it down, I memorized it. It was airtight. There was not a bit of improvisation, even though I had improv experience, because I was in my head so much about my memory post a brain injury that I thought, you know, I'm gonna look like an idiot up there if I what was I gonna say? And I was so fearful of that to the point that I was you know, just very rigid. To and a blind comedian in Denver that I'd worked with, after a show, he goes, "Are you reading off of your paper out of your notebook?" I was like, "What?" He's like, "Well, that's how it sounds." And I was like, "Oh boy." Okay, that's not what I wanted to feel like, but I was so fearful of letting go. It took me a couple years to go, okay, let's prepare less. You know, you know this, and even if you don't, how are they going to know that?
Right.
So I would start like preparing less or allowing for improv, or even just looking at the audience. You know, sometimes when you get on stage and I still have stage fright, you know, that's always been a thing. You just kind of look past them, look through them, And so there's no interaction
Interaction.
with them. But I started like looking at them and seeing what their faces were doing and how they were reacting to me saying I almost died, and them being like, I'm like, oh no, are you okay? Is it something I said? I would start playing with them. So that only came after a few years of being like, I gotta like relax.
And then how did it feel once you did that?
It felt good. It was just like more, it was truer to myself, to be honest. Like it was like the first couple years I didn't want anybody to know I had a brain injury, like not really.
Yeah.
And I even stopped doing the brain injury material because I was getting some feedback that like no one else is doing this, like what are you kind of doing? So I was fearful, and I kind of like closed it off and then did every other kind of material I could think of until I started teaching a stand-up writing and performance class in New York City. And I was teaching these students who had never done stand-up before, but I'm like preaching like, you gotta like find something unique about you that only you can say. And one of them goes, hey, when's the last time you did a joke about your brain injury, huh? I was like, oh, you got me
Oh,
there.
yeah.
And from that point I just kind of leaned into my flaws. I would lean into, if I trip on stage, if I can't get the mic if I break the mic. I mean, how many microphones have I broken? Oh my gosh. Like I started leaning into it and realizing that's actually what people enjoy about me is my flaws.
Right.
And that I'm not trying to be this perfect, rigid individual, that I'm just myself. And I'm just like, hey, I forgot what that word was. And that's okay, because you didn't even know what I was going to say in the first place. So what do you know?
Yeah. And I was
So,
talking on a aphasia, where you get your words mixed up or not the right word, program and answering questions. And I said for somebody who has not had a stroke or aphasia experience, that the closest thing I can say is when you're trying to think of a movie or an actor, it's like, it's there, but you can't kind of get it. And that happens, like your entire life, maybe
all day. Yeah.
So it's not age related. It's not, everybody's had that experience. So that's the closest to, and it drives you crazy as the person trying to think of what the name is. And so I sometimes, when I feel like I'm not getting the last couple words out or can't find the word, I just try to say, okay, it's just like not remember. It's no big deal. It's more like not remembering an actor's name rather than, oh my God, are you having another stroke, or is this, pressing in for that, kind of thing. So talk a little bit about how then you pivoted again or added you did the improv writing class, but now you're doing some writing coaching classes. So how did that, in your progression, did you drop one ball and pick that one up, or you just said, okay, I'm done with that stuff, so now I'm going to go focus on this?
Yeah. As hard as I tried to avoid teaching, I naturally fell back into it because I'm good at it. But I went from kind of teaching comedy and writing classes in New York to doing it as really freelance on the side. I would pick up a few clients here and there, work with them on writing their short stories or working on their blog, or writing an email. People whose first language wasn't English. So that's how it started, and that's been going on for some time now. And this year, after a year of unemployment and leaving LA with a new brain bleed and taking some time to just go on walks and take naps, I started looking for jobs again, and I was just so frustrated because I'm just like, none of this fits for me. Like, none of this makes sense. I don't want to do a full-time job. I can't go back to teaching. I want something remote. I want something flexible. And one of my clients, my longest, standing client, was like, why don't you just do this full time? Like, what if you got like 10 more? Yeah. What if you just got 10 more of me and you just did this, all day, every day? And I was like, oh, there's an idea. So I started my business this year, 2023. And the second that I kind of came out about it, like, it was like a coming out. It was like, hey guys, I do this. And then all of a sudden these people that I've known for years are like, it's perfect timing because I'm writing a book, or I want to do this poetry thing. Like all these people just kind of started coming to me, and I'm like, oh, okay, now I get it. And the same thing with, having written a book myself, like people have always come to me over the years and asked me, how do you do it? Let's go to coffee. Can I ask you, just get a brain dump of like how to write a book in like a 3-hour coffee session. And I was doing that for a while until I went, all right.
It's worth more than the cost of you buying me a coffee.
Yes, it is. It is. Yeah. So that's the newest adventure.
And when did you stop the podcast? In 2020? And the last podcast implied you were going to continue. So what happened?
Yes.
How did that go?
Yes. I started with a friend, producing friend, and she put out the first few episodes with me and then jumped ship. And so then I was just doing it all myself. And I was in New York and the book was coming out. And I was working like 5 jobs. So I was like, man, and I wasn't putting them out consistently enough. And after that one, I was like, I don't know if I can like manage this. I really want to jump back into it. And I have lists of people that I want to interview. So it's something that like I'm going to do. It's just a matter of like, can I figure out how to do it consistently enough on my own and have a cadence that works for me? Or should I, work with some other people and maybe pivot, maybe make it, something new? But I mean, I love the initial concept, and the fact that anybody listens to it is still amazing to me. So I'm like, what? Someone listen to my podcast? Like, what?
I know when I reached out.
Because I just, it was such an exciting thing, and had some early momentum, but it is hard to put out, this, it's hard to put it out, especially if it's just yourself doing it. So I'm looking forward to Mimi and the Brain season 2. When that will be has yet to be discovered.
So then another question I wanted to ask you is, and I know that because your brain injury, there isn't a genetic reason or a cause that the doctors or you have been able to come up with. So you're in a slightly different category, I guess. But in terms of advice to somebody who's recently had a brain injury, just in terms of how you approach it, what would your advice be to somebody who's just had, is kind of coming up for air? Because when you have it right away, it's like you're one foot in front of the other. But as you start letting other things in, what would your advice be to them?
That's such a good question. I would say community. I would say community 100%, because when you're going through it, you really don't know anyone else who is. And that's how I genuinely felt. The first couple of years, I didn't know anybody else ever had a brain injury, or if they were, they were old, older people. Yeah. And it was Instagram that became a place to meet people. And I think it was maybe 2018. March is Brain Injury Awareness Month. And I'd learned this fact, and I went, okay, every day of March, I'm going to post something about my brain injury. Because I was teaching that class, and I was like, I should really get back into this part of myself that I haven't allowed myself to really own fully. And oddly enough, I posted a photo of me wearing my headphones on the subway. And this random podcaster guy with a brain injury popped into my inbox and said, we're the same. Like, I wear headphones all day, every day. We should be friends. We both have brain injuries. We should be friends. And now that's a very good friend of mine. And there's so many stories like that. There's so many people I've connected to over the years. Young people, older people. I mean, it's just, there's so many of us out there. You think you're alone, but you're just not.
Yeah.
And the only people that can really understand where you're at and make you feel like there is hope are other people like you. And so seek them out, find groups, if support groups are not your thing, like get on social media, listen to a podcast, hit up the podcaster themselves, like do an interview, like there's just so many ways to connect and to feel like you're not alone and to consume that content. Because you might be surrounded by very well-meaning loved ones who just don't know how to express what you're going through, or maybe can't understand it to the level that you need them to. So listen to a stroke podcast, like find a new friend, go to a meetup, there's lots of people out there that want exactly the same thing, and it can be very healing, especially when you first go through your recovery.
And I think with COVID, one of the silver linings with COVID, where before it was so not a preference to remotely FaceTime, Zoom, all of that, it became a fact of life. And so now, I mean, there's Zoom fatigue, but it opens up the door of who you can communicate with, and it doesn't have to be in the city that you're in or the country that you're in. You got to deal with time zones, but you can develop relationships kind of around the globe. And I think the thing that struck me once I started leaning into, letting the denial kind of go off, when I had the chapbook with poems about my stroke published, where I didn't want to talk about it, but when you go to readings, you got to talk about it. Was that strokes are increasing and they're hitting younger people and being debilitating, because people are living longer. So it's not as if it's just the old grandmas like my grandmother and my mom when she got into her 90s having strokes. I was 49, which was young, but you were really young. And so I think that the awareness around it, I want more on prevention, but right now the awareness of about how a stroke, unfortunately, is very prevalent, has got a silver lining to it, because there are more people you can connect with, sadly. But hopefully with that mix will, for things that can be preventable, not in your case, a couple other people I've talked to, there was no genetic reason or, stress impact. But to have an awareness about it so that people can get the help that they need, sooner. Do you have advice for caregivers? You kind of touched on that. Immediate family members, the well-intended don't know what to do, but what would be your advice to them?
Yeah, I would say just listen more than you talk. Chances are, like I said, they're well-meaning, but they're having their own process. They're having their own experience with what you're going through. My parents are very supportive. Are they going to crack up at my jokes about my near death? You know what? No. And that's okay. They experienced a huge trauma with me. And so the more that I can be honest with them, the more that they can understand, and to have that space to talk, even if it's not used or they're not ready, like just always providing space, taking care of yourself as a caregiver so that you're not burned out. That's a big thing too, because again, it's such a trauma to a relationship, a family, a friendship. Yeah, there are friends that I really traumatized out there, and they're probably still coping with some things. And now with the second one's doing its thing, they're going through it again a second time.
Thank you, Mimi, so much for your insight.
This was lovely.
And the breadth of what you've still embraced despite what you went through. And I mean, part of that was you were so freaking young, it's like you were at that phase of your life where you pivot, whether you knew you were going to or not, but you were that young that life comes at you different ways. And this just sideswiped you in a big way when you did it. Is there anything else that you want to add that I didn't ask you? Any parting words of wisdom?
Just have faith. Like what you're going through now, like this is a moment in time, and it does get better. It does change. You're never going to be stuck in the same situation. You're always going to adapt and grow. And I would say that for anyone listening that's having that experience, you're more resilient than you think.
Thank you so much for taking the time, and enjoy Scotland.
Thank you so much, Beth. I really appreciate it.
Bye-bye.
Bye, Beth.
Thanks for joining me this month. If you enjoyed this episode, please tell your friends, leave a comment, and subscribe. Until next month, take a moment and hug someone you love.